At 9:15 a.m. on June 4th, 1942, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stood on the deck of the battleship Yamato, positioned hundreds of miles behind Japan's main striking force, waiting for confirmation that the future he had warned about for more than a decade was unfolding before him. 6 months earlier, his carrier aircraft had struck Pearl Harbor with devastating effect. 6 months of uninterrupted Japanese expansion had followed, exactly as he had predicted. Now, Japan's most powerful fleet was converging on Midway Atoll, intended to deliver a decisive blow that would force the United States to the negotiating table. Yamamoto commanded 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same ships that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor. Supporting them were battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines, along with the most experienced naval aviators in the world. These pilots had trained for years and gained combat experience across China and the Pacific. On paper, Japan possessed every advantage. Yet Yamamoto carried a burden no other Japanese admiral shared. He had lived in the United States. He had walked its streets, studied in its universities, and socialized with its naval officers. He understood America not as an abstraction or a caricature, but as a living society, and what he knew filled him with dread. Yamamoto understood what his peers refused to accept. Americans were not weak, not decadent, and not incapable of sacrifice. They were something far more dangerous, an industrial giant with immense resources and a fierce determination that Japan had awakened through violence. Within hours, everything Yamamoto feared would come to pass in the most devastating naval defeat in Japanese history. The disaster at Midway and the brutal 3-year struggle that followed represented one of the greatest failures of strategic perception ever recorded. Japanese leaders believed they understood America. They were catastrophically wrong. That misunderstanding did not originate at Pearl Harbor. It had been forming for decades. Japan's fundamental problem in 1941 was not military strength, but perception. Civilian and military leaders had constructed an image of America that bore little resemblance to reality. That false image guided decisions that ultimately guaranteed national ruin. Japanese leadership widely believed Americans were spiritually weak. This belief was not mere propaganda, it was sincerely held at the highest levels. A society built on democracy, individual rights, and material comfort, they believed, could never match the fighting spirit of warriors raised under Bushido. American soldiers were mocked as pampered products of a soft culture, men raised with automobiles and convenience, incapable of enduring real hardship. In contrast, Japan saw itself as a nation prepared for total sacrifice. To Japanese planners, American concern for individual life and comfort represented a fatal flaw. They assumed a population unwilling to suffer would abandon the fight after a single crushing defeat. A nation of factory workers and shopkeepers, they believed, would negotiate peace rather than endure prolonged bloodshed. Japanese intelligence reinforced these assumptions. Reports from officers stationed in the United States described labor unrest, political division, isolationist sentiment, and an apparently unprepared military. While American industry was impressive, Japanese planners believed it would take years to transition to wartime production, time Japan intended to use to build an impregnable defensive perimeter across the Pacific. American culture itself was dismissed as violent, immoral, and chaotic. Hollywood films shown in Japan reinforced stereotypes of disorder and lawlessness. Intellectuals derided American society as shallow and spiritually hollow. Yet one man knew these conclusions were dangerously false. Isoroku Yamamoto had spent 4 years inside the very country Japan misjudged. Born on April 4, 1884, in Nagaka, Niigata Prefecture, Yamamoto came from a samurai family that had lost status after the Meiji Restoration. The legacy of defeat shaped his character, instilling discipline and a relentless drive to prove his worth. Despite poor health in childhood, Yamamoto showed exceptional intelligence. He excelled academically and graduated near the top of his class from the Imperial Naval Academy, just in time to fight in the Russo-Japanese War. At the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, Japan achieved a historic victory over Russia, but Yamamoto paid dearly. A shell explosion left him wounded, unconscious, and missing 2 fingers on his left hand. The injury marked him for life, earning him the nickname the 80-sen Admiral due to the reduced cost of manicures. Yamamoto wore his scars proudly as proof of sacrifice. His superiors recognized his intellect, strategic insight, and fluency in English. After graduating from the Naval Staff College, Yamamoto was adopted into the Yamamoto family and took their name. In 1919, the Navy sent him to the United States to study at Harvard University. There, Yamamoto focused on the American oil industry, the lifeblood of modern naval warfare. But his most important education occurred beyond the classroom. He traveled widely, visiting factories, oil fields, steel mills, and industrial centers. What he saw stunned him. In Detroit, Yamamoto watched automobile assembly lines produce vehicles at an unimaginable pace. In Pittsburgh and Gary, steel mills generated more metal in weeks than Japan produced in years. Texas oil refineries processed more petroleum in a month than Japan consumed annually. The scale of American industry dwarfed Japan beyond comparison. Yamamoto immediately grasped the strategic implications. Industrial capacity was destiny. A nation that could outproduce its enemy would eventually win any prolonged war. Equally important was what Yamamoto learned about Americans themselves. He found them practical, competitive, innovative, and resilient. They argued constantly and criticized their government, yet worked relentlessly and took pride in achievement. Far from weak, they possessed a stubborn determination reminiscent of Japan's own warrior traditions. Yamamoto also discovered poker. He became an obsessive player, funding his travels with winnings earned through calculated risk, psychological insight, and nerve. The game taught him how Americans thought, how they bluffed, raised the stakes, and refused to fold under pressure. Years later, historians would note that Pearl Harbor itself resembled a poker gamble, a bold, all-in move meant to knock out a superior opponent early. When Yamamoto returned to Japan in 1921, the knowledge he carried haunted him. He understood that Japan could not defeat America in a long war. During a second posting to the United States in the late 1920s, he deepened that understanding, observing how rapidly American industry had mobilized during World War I. Throughout the 1930s, Yamamoto openly opposed war with the United States. He resisted the invasion of Manchuria, the war in China, and the alliance with Nazi Germany.
His views made him enemies among hardline nationalists. He received constant death threats and narrowly avoided assassination. Eventually, he was sent to sea as commander of the combined fleet, both a promotion and a form of exile. Yamamoto repeatedly warned Japan's leaders. He predicted that Japan could dominate for 6 months, perhaps a year, but would face inevitable defeat afterwards. Once American industry mobilized, Japan would be overwhelmed. His warnings were ignored. When war came, Yamamoto did his duty. Pearl Harbor was executed with devastating precision. Yet Yamamoto felt no triumph. The American carriers had escaped. The attack had unified the United States. Industrial mobilization accelerated beyond Japanese expectations. For 6 months, Japan advanced rapidly across the Pacific. Then came Midway. American codebreakers anticipated Yamamoto's plan. On June 4th, Japanese carriers were caught with their decks full of armed aircraft. In minutes, 3 carriers burned. By day's end, 4 were lost. Japan's elite naval aviation corps was destroyed in a single day. Yamamoto understood immediately. The turning point had arrived. The war had become the long struggle he had predicted, and Japan could not win it. What followed confirmed every warning he had given. Guadalcanal, industrial attrition, pilot shortages, and logistical collapse revealed the fatal flaw in Japanese assumptions. American production surged beyond imagination. New carriers, aircraft, and trained pilots arrived faster than Japan could respond. In April 1943, Yamamoto was killed when American fighters intercepted his plane.